Thank you. I'm the Dean of the Klein College of Media and Communication at Temple. First, I send my love and condolences to Abe and Shauna, Jackson, General Monroe, Danya, and the rest of Bryan's family. And I want to thank them for creating a scholarship fund at Bryan's name at Temple so that talented young people can follow in his footsteps. I had the privilege of knowing Bryan for 35 years, which means I'm older than most of you, but it was a time when I was a young editor at the Seattle Times, and he was a photojournalism intern from the University of Washington, which was one of my alma maters. So we bonded over UW Husky sports, and over the years we stayed in good touch. We would see each other in person only once or twice a year, usually at an NABJ or an AS&E convention. But it would always begin with one of the big man's enveloping bear hugs and always end with "Go Dogs." Over those years, I watched with just tremendous pride as I saw Bryan rise through the ranks to become a journalism superstar, helping make the Merc the best regional newspaper in America in the 90s, helping lead the Biloxi paper to a Pulitzer, as we've heard, reinvigorating Ebony and Jet, and helping shape the political coverage at CNN. At each of those stops, Bryan was a superb journalist, certainly, but more than that, and one thing I picked up on very early on, Bryan was a superb teacher. And it was that skill that made him one of the most effective leaders in the history of the National Association of Black Journalists. He was as passionate as anybody about advocating for better coverage of underrepresented communities and for the elevation of journalists of color in America's newsrooms. And I know that beneath the surface, he was as pissed off as anyone about the profession's slow progress in that regard. But even then, Bryan was in many ways Professor Monroe. He was a man who used his extraordinary personal skills in teaching the mostly white guys leading newsrooms, of which then I was one, why these changes were crucial for journalism and for our business survival. As it turned out, some of us white editors were better students than others. And while we made some progress, it clearly wasn't enough. But I saw again what a great teacher Bryan was, and it stuck with me. So a few years later, when I left my job as editor of the Seattle Times to become a dean at Temple University in Philadelphia, I knew one man I wanted on our faculty. Fortunately, during the interview process, our faculty search committee agreed, and in 2015, we made Bryan an offer he couldn't refuse. Bringing Bryan to Temple was a point of just great joy and pride for me. His office was right down the hall from mine, and we continued to kibitz about newspapers, our many mutual friends, and the Washington Huskies. He loved our college, our university, our students, and his Klein College of Media and Communication colleagues. And they loved him. Each semester, Bryan's students were enthralled from day one when he told them that story we've all heard countless times, that he was the first person to interview Barack Obama after he was elected president and the last person to interview Michael Jackson before he died. But as you can imagine, with a bunch of 18 and 19-year-olds, they were hooked. And not that his classes were easy. In a remembrance that a couple of students wrote for the Temple News, they said his law and ethics class was like being in law school, with Bryan making a Socratic method circle around the entire class. Just like at one of his barbecues, nobody got away without having a turn to speak. Bryan's last bid project at Temple was co-leading a Klein College task force performing a content and culture audit for the Philadelphia Inquirer focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion. That superb work is getting national attention and will undoubtedly help push that organization and many others forward in coverage and representation. Again, more teaching by Bryan Monroe. As another of his students said, quote, "He was one of those professors who really wanted you to understand and grasp the material. I couldn't be more thankful and grateful to have learned from Professor Bryan Monroe." Me too. Me too. I love you, brother Bryan. Rest in power. Go Dogs.
Thank you. Everyone has done such an unbelievable job in and capturing Bryan, and so familiar because we've all suffered such a loss with such a great friend.